This 3-ingredient chocolate cake recipe is really interesting. I've seen it a lot on YouTube, so I wanted to give it a try. If you haven't seen this, all it is that you take chocolate cookies. I'm using store brand Oreos, but you could use some other type of chocolate cookie, some milk, and baking powder. I'm going to take the cookies, crush them into a powder, add the milk, add the baking powder, pour it into a cake pan or maybe even a casserole dish, and bake it. So there are no eggs, there's no flour, no sugar. This recipe is really, really simple and really inexpensive. I know it seems kind of odd, but if you think about it, I've used boxes of cake mix to make cookies, so why not use cookies to make cake? Like I said, I'm using store brand Oreos. I have how much is it? One 14.3 ounce packet of Oreos. I used a little over 350 grams, so I used 32 Oreos. This is the packet that they came in. I have 4 left over, so that should give you an idea of how many cookies to use. I'm also going to use 1.5 cups or 360 grams of milk. I am using skim milk because that's what I have, but I'm sure you could use other types of milk as well. I am using 2.5 teaspoons of baking powder. Some of the recipes varied, so if you aren't quite sure how much to use, I always recommend going in the middle. I'm also going to add a little bit of salt because I think salt balances out sweetness in a lot of things, but that I do not think is absolutely critical. The first step is crushing these Oreos. If you have a food processor, that would be perfect, but I do not. So just like always, I am going to use this opportunity to take out my anger on the world. I'm going to put the Oreos in this Ziploc bag. Make sure it is sealed. And then I'm going to distribute them a little more evenly. I'm going to take my rolling pin and I'm going to start smashing them. It's been about a minute and I'm pretty much done crushing the Oreos. The bag is starting to break a little bit, so I am just going to transfer the crushed Oreo crumbs into this bowl. Some of the filling is stuck to the sides of the bag, so I'm going to use a knife to scrape that out while I put my milk in the microwave for probably 30 seconds to a minute. A lot of the recipes online said that warm milk combines with the cookie crumbs a little bit better than cold milk does. If you heat milk too long, it will boil over, so I don't want it to get too hot. So I think about lukewarm should be fine. I just finished scraping the sides of the bag. As you can see, all I did is I just took my knife, scraped it on one side, and then held it down and scraped it like that. That way we don't miss any of that delicious Oreo filling. My milk is heated now as well. I heated it on high, uncovered, for 30 seconds, and then another 30 seconds. Honestly, probably 45 seconds at once should be fine. I can put my finger in it. It's warm, but it's definitely not hot. I also use my spoon to try to break up some of the larger crumbs here, but it does not have to be perfect. I'm going to add in my, like I said, 2.5 teaspoons of baking powder. If you leave out the baking powder, I don't think this will rise very much. I think it's going to be fairly flat. So the baking powder is an important ingredient, unless you want a denser flat cake. Here is the milk. Like I said, 1.5 cups. Now I'm going to stir. A lot of the recipes say that if you use a handheld immersion blender, you can get a batter that's a lot smoother. One of the videos I saw, I think it was Emma's Goodies, she said that she's tried it both ways, and although the immersion blender step is not critical, it does make the cake turn out better. So I am going to do that as well. Now, time to blend. The batter for my 3-ingredient chocolate cake with Oreos is now done. I forgot to mention that while you are making the batter, you should start preheating your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. As you can see, the batter is a lot smoother. However, what I do want to recommend that you do is that you use a bowl that's deeper than it is wide so that the immersion blender can really get down in there. I'm not going to show you what my kitchen looked like, but let's just say the batter kind of went on the walls a little bit. So yes, you want a bowl with higher sides. My kitchen was not destroyed or anything, but there was some cleanup I had to do on the walls. So like I said, use a deep bowl. This is an 8-inch cake pan. Usually I butter and flour my cakes, but for this one I just sprayed it with canola oil because I know if you make this recipe, you want something easy. All I'm going to do is I'm going to pour in the batter, scrape it, and then bake this at 350 Fahrenheit for probably 30 minutes. I just took my 3-ingredient chocolate cake out of the oven. It was in at 350 Fahrenheit for 30 minutes. My cake's been cooling for about 20 minutes, so now it's time to take it out of the pan. Here I have a plate that is wider than the cake pan, and I just put a piece of plastic wrap over it. Here I have a knife. I'm going to run it around the side of the cake like this. At least once, twice just to make sure. Oh, whoops. Be careful not to tear your cake. Then take your plate, turn it over like that. Flip it over at the same time. And there you go. Not only was it perfectly round, it was also a deep, dark, beautiful shade of black. Although I'm sure that this really easy chocolate cake would be great on its own, most recipes that I saw online add some sort of frosting or topping. There was one video in which someone used Nutella straight from the jar as a really quick chocolate frosting, and I think it would be great on this. I think that pretty much anything could work. Cream cheese, buttercream, whipped cream, whatever you have. But I decided to just sprinkle it with some powdered sugar. I put about a 1/4 cup of powdered sugar in my strainer and just sprinkled it over the top of the cake. I then added a few raspberries for some extra color, and it was done. In all honesty, I have to say that I thought it turned out beautifully. This simple 3-ingredient chocolate cake looked like something that you would get at an expensive European bakery. It looked really expensive and sophisticated, so I was really curious how it would taste. When I finally cut into it and took a bite, I realized that this 3-ingredient Oreo chocolate cake tasted just as good as it looked. Although it did taste like Oreos, I think that the best way to describe the flavor would be a cakey brownie. I thought that it had the perfect amount of chocolate flavor that would be pleasing to the most people. It wasn't too dark and it wasn't too light. I also thought that this cake had the perfect amount of sweetness. It was totally fine on its own, but I think that if you wanted to eat it with some ice cream, you definitely could, and it wouldn't be too sweet. Was a powdered sugar on top necessary? No, I think you could definitely eat this by itself, plain, like I said, but I do think that the bit of powdered sugar on top added the perfect amount of extra sweetness. As you can see, now that the cake is cut, the inside was nice and moist. Although I really liked both the flavor and texture of this easy 3-ingredient chocolate cake recipe, my only complaint is that the outside was just a tad bit tough. Maybe I overbaked it by a few minutes, but honestly, the inside was really good, so maybe that's just a characteristic of this type of cake. The inside is moist, but the outside is just a little bit tough, a little bit on the dry side. Although this definitely turned out great as is, I think that you could definitely tweak this. Maybe a teaspoon of coffee, some lemon zest, orange zest, or maybe chocolate chips are all options. Now that this Oreo version was such a success, I will definitely be trying this method with other cookies, so stay tuned. When I first saw this recipe online, I was really surprised and I was really intrigued, so I just had to make it. In all honesty, this cake, considering that it only had 3 ingredients, was really easy and really delicious. Was this the absolute best chocolate cake that I've ever had? No. I think that if you want something that's absolutely mind-blowingly good, you have to go through a bit more, as the Argentines would say, quilombo, a bit more mess, a bit more hassle. However, considering that this easy chocolate cake recipe with no eggs, no flour, and no butter was so good, I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. I know that Valentine's Day has already passed, but I served this cake with some of my raspberry cookies, and it was definitely a great combination. Be sure to give this recipe a try. I know you'll fall in love with it at first bite. As always, thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.